So when I was growing up, the family had this saying that God hates a coward. Now, I first started hearing that saying from my grandmother. Now, my grandmother was born and raised in New York City in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was a rough and tumble city at the time, and if you wanted to succeed in anything, you had to put yourself out there. You had to be bold and experience things. When she and my grandfather married, they moved up here to the wilds of New Hampshire. They moved out of the wilds of New York City into literally the wilds and wilderness of New Hampshire. So God hates a coward. To make those decisions, you had to be bold. You had to step out and try things. So when they moved here in 1921, they bought a 22-room mansion and 50 acres of land. And my grandfather wanted to be an innkeeper. He wanted to run this inn and a restaurant, and they actually did that. And his goal or his dream was to serve the lake community and to serve all of those wealthy people that were coming up from the city, from New York, from Hartford, from Boston, and he wanted to serve their traveling, and that was his goal. So he ran that inn until 1929, and you all know what happened in 29. It was the Great Depression. All the quality money began to dry up. So what is he going to do? How is he going to afford this large estate place that he had bought? Well, Grant became a chicken farmer, and in fact that is how my grandfather and my grandmother survived for the next 10 or 15 years. They had one of the larger chicken farms in the state of New Hampshire. So as my grandmother always said, God hates a coward. So if you're not bold, if you don't step out there, if you don't try things, then you're never going to be successful at anything. You have to be bold. You have to be willing to put yourself out there to take risk. But it wasn't just my grandmother. She taught that lesson to all of her children. She had 7 of them, and my dad, my uncle, and my aunts, they always would use that term, God hates a coward. So when you grow up in that environment and everything and everybody around you is always about being bold and stepping out and trying different things and not being put off by what seems to be the impossible, you begin to adopt that. It becomes a part of your life and your mantra as well. Until today, I've decided I'm not willing to take the risk cutting this Browning on that scroll saw. Instead, I'm going to set up the bandsaw, the full-size bandsaw, and we're going to cut this over there. And at the same time, I'm going to show you the setup on the bandsaw as I get ready to cut this. Don't go away, guys. So this is my scroll saw. It's a DeWalt, and it is a beast. Now, personally, I've always been the guy who believes that you can always get away with a smaller machine. But when you buy smaller machines, you're always limited to the extent of something that you can do. So all of a sudden a bigger project comes along and you have to refuse it, or you have to find some other way around doing that job. So this is a beast. It's a big machine. Now, I don't know what the model number is. I've had this thing for years, and I've done several projects with it. So with a scroll saw, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can do mosaics, inlays, fretwork. There's so many options that you can do this with, but it's basically limited to very thin material, like very small plywoods. And in fact, the blades are so fine and they're so weak that they sell the replacement blades by the dozens. You have to be very, very careful when you're cutting with these things that you're not pushing that blade so hard that you risk breaking it. So again, these scroll saws are really They're really delicate to use, and they're made for using it on delicate things. So let's take a look and see what you can do with a scroll saw. So the scroll saw is essentially a reciprocating saw, like a handsaw. It simply goes up and down. Now some of the things that you can do with it, you can adjust the table for angle, and when you do certain mosaics or certain inlays, you want to have about a 5-degree overlap so that when the part sits down over the other part, literally the seam disappears. This one, not only does it reciprocate, but you can adjust the speed of the blade going up and down. Because of the tininess or the smallness of the blade, you can make some very, very sharp turns on it. Now the key to using it is you always have to be forward motion. You always have to be moving into the blade, because if you're not, if you twist or turn even a little bit, that blade wants to snap, it wants to break. That is a scroll saw, and that's what makes it such a marvelous tool, in that you can do very, very tiny cuts. Now this is a 1/4-inch piece of plywood, but if you're doing thin laminates, you can make these incredibly small curves and cuts. Now the reason I chose not to use this is strictly because of the size of the blade and my risk that once I get inside that thicker walnut gunstock, that I'm going to be putting so much tension on that blade that it's going to break. And if it breaks, my concern is that the flailing blade might overlap and then scratch the finish on that gunstock. So I decided I'm not going to use that. Now this blade it's got a 20 thousandths kerf. Now it's not that the 20 thousandths kerf is the problem, is that the thickness of the blade, the overall thickness from front to back of that blade is 45 thousandths. I mean, literally, it's almost square. It's 20 by 40. So there's not a lot of strength in that blade. Now, I do have a blade for my main bandsaw that is designed for doing work like making tighter turns, and the blade, the kerf on that is, excuse me, is 40 thousandths. So we're double the thickness. So that means I'm going to lose 20 more thousandths worth of material just making this cut. And then I have to, at the same time, I have to go back and file away and sand away all of the cut lines from the blade. But here's where it gets better, because the thickness from front to back on this blade is 240 thousandths. So literally, we're 200 thousandths wider on this bandsaw or full bandsaw blade than we are on the scroll saw blade. So my decision is I'm going to sacrifice that extra 20 thousandths of kerf and go cut it on the main bandsaw, and knowing that I'm not going to end up damaging the gunstock at the end. All right, let's go change that blade. All right, so in order to put the 1/4-inch blade on, I have to take the 1/2-inch blade off. So let's do that first. This is my jet bandsaw. It's an 18-inch bandsaw, and I have never regretted a single day that I've had a bandsaw this big. Some of the things, or some of the projects I've had to run through here. So we'll open up the door, or doors, and then we need to reduce the tension on the blades. So once we've pulled the tension off, the blade should just pop out. Now, there's a couple things that we need to do in order to remove the blade. and you're going to understand why I didn't want to change this blade. In order to get this blade out, I have to remove this plug, and the plug is just that, it's a plug, and it's designed to keep the split in the table where we pull the blade out from closing in. So that's the first thing I need to do. The second thing I need to do is I need to pull out this, this guide plate. Having accomplished that, then we have to do a twisty-turny, getting this out of the slots. Getting the blade over to the main slot. And then out of the saw. So putting the new blade in is just the reverse of that process. We're going to take the 1/4" blade. We need to open it up. This is always fun because there's always the risk you're going to cut yourself. This one came out pretty good. All right. So the blade, the teeth have got to go in a downward direction. So when we put this back on, this is inside out. So the teeth, when it's on, the blade spins, or the wheel spins this way, so the blade has to be in that location, coming down. All right, so there we go. So we reverse the process, go back in through the slot in the table, come under here. Now, one of the things we want to be careful of is that we're not kinking the blade, because if you end up kinking it, you're going to end up creating a weak place, and the bandsaw is not going to like that. Or the bandsaw blade's not going to like it. Once we've got it on the wheels, we want to start to tighten it up. At the same time that we're tightening it up, we want to make sure that we're still centered to the tire, the rubber tire that is what helps this thing track. And because this blade has been folded for so long, it does not want to track exactly true. So let's see if we can. And again, you get a little bit of a sense why I didn't want to go through this, because this is not always a fun thing to do. Now these blades or these tires, they're self-tracking, or the blades are self-tracking. So you make these things track right by tilting the top tire, top wheel in and out. I'm not going to know if this is going to track correctly until I start it up, but all right. So let's put the trim ring back in, or the guide back in. Let's put the plug back in. So the last thing that we need to do is set the tension up on the blade. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how that's done. So Jet provides a tension tab depending on the width of the blade. So you can see that the tension required for a 1/4" blade is less than the tension required for a 1/2" blade, which is less than the tension required for a 1" blade, and etc. All right, so we're going to tighten this up until we get this red tab up to that 1/4" line. All right, so we're all set for tension, and I'll talk about that here in a second. I don't think I've ever changed a blade and not cut myself. So I managed to do it again on this blade change. And the problem with it isn't so much the cut, but that you get blood down on the steel table or the cast iron table and it rusts. So you want to make sure if you cut yourself and you get blood on your table that you wipe that off pretty quick. What I want to talk a little bit more about tension on a blade. So Jet has a position for that 1/4 inch blade that you tighten the blade tension up to. Lennox, which is the blades that I use, Lennox has a gauge that is specifically designed for setting tension, and Lennox recommends 20 to 30,000 psi of tension in order to keep these blades from busting and from end to end so that they track correctly. So you all know that I worked at Ruger for 44 years. Well, I spent 30 years in the wood shop. We learned that lesson really pretty early on, that we didn't understand the necessity for keeping that tension on those blades to that amount of tension. And then we talked to a Lennox rep, and the Lennox rep is the one that told us about the blade tension, and the Lennox rep is the one that actually pointed out this gauge. One of the things that used to happen is because we didn't have enough tension, and because we were doing production, we were doing stocks at an incredible rate. We were bandsawing these shapes out at an incredible rate. And these operators, they were working under incentive pay system, so they needed to get this work out. And so what would happen is if we didn't have enough tension on those blades and then we began to twist and turn, those blades would literally snap. They would break, and it wasn't just on the weld seam, they'd break everywhere. And when they broke, they'd come snaking all out, and they'd literally come chasing you. And when those blades broke, you needed to step away quickly so that you didn't get wrapped up in that blade. Fortunately, in all the years that I ran that shop, or we were at that shop, nobody ever got hurt. Now, when we started setting it up with that tension gauge, our blade usage and our brakes went way down. So we know the system works, all right? Blade tension is really important. Now, the next thing I have to do is adjust the guide wheel. So let me show you how that's done. And one of the adjustments that we need to make, there's 3 wheels or guide wheels. There's the one that goes side to side, and then there's this one in the back that keeps the blade from going back too far. Now there's one on the top and there's one on the bottom. So we need to adjust both of those. It's a simple adjustment. You simply loosen the wing nut and you bring that in until it just barely touches it. Now the key to this is that we do not want that wheel, that back wheel, spinning until you put tension on the blade by cutting. So you can see that wheel is just barely missing the back of the blade. But it's that wheel that keeps the blade from flexing inward and allows you to get more control. Now the second thing is that these side wheels do the same thing. They help steer. I'm not going to adjust those because the amount of work I'm going to do is pretty small. But if I was doing a lot of cutting with this blade, then I'd adjust all the wheels. Anyway, so you can sort of see the amount of work that has to go into just simply changing a blade. And what we're going to do is we're going to snap this on and off because we want that blade to track into center on those tires, on the wheels and the rubber tires that go around. We want it to track center, and we don't want it to wobble. We want it to be tracking so it tracks true. So by snapping it like that, it allows the blade to find center on that rubber tire. Alright, so we've got it good. So we're ready to cut some wood. Let's go ahead and do that next. Alright, so we're going to use the same piece of 1/4 inch plywood that we used on the scroll saw. Want to get the height of that follower wheel as low to the material as we can. Okay, so we make a simple cut. Now let's see if we can make some curves and turns. So you can see we can make those curves with that smaller blade. We're just not going to make them quite as sharp as we can make them on the scroll saw. But that curve is going to be more than adequate for what we need to trace on that Gunstock. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to go cut that same curve over on the scroll saw, and then we'll compare the difference, and you can see one of my concerns about using this blade and how much material it's going to remove. So clearly you can see, even without measuring it, the difference between the scroll saw and the bandsaw. It's a 20 thousandths difference in the kerf width on that. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to lose that amount of wood so that I don't end up breaking or damaging something, all right? So anyway, God hates a coward. If you enjoyed this kind of video, please leave a comment below. Let me know what you think, and I can do more sort of tool work kind of videos in the future as well. I thought this would be a fun one, something a little bit different. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps the algorithm. It helps YouTube decide that this is a channel worth watching. Really would appreciate that, guys. Also, if you would consider going over to my Patreon and signing up for the $3 or $5 level, that would be greatly appreciated as well. Help defray some of the cost of producing these videos. Ring that bell so you get notified the next time I post a video. I know you want to see the next video. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.